Hey Butterflies, welcome to my comic verse. Thank you so much for tuning in. So today I'll be analyzing Juggernaut issue 1 with the topic of surrender and sacrifice. So I don't know about you guys, but these are words that had very strong ties to religious connotations to me, which they do address in a way in X-Men, but today we are going to discuss it for what it actually is and how it applies to our real life. Especially with Juggernaut being in limbo, because that's what this is all about, being in limbo. Have you ever been in limbo when you've lost your path or your previous path has been destroyed, taken away from you, snatched, deterred, whatever it is? And you're still headed forward, but you have no idea where. And this is limbo, when everything in our life feels like it has fallen apart and it feels like we have no control over what's happening. When the things that we value the most are slipping away, we tend to hold on with every last bit, even while it continues to destroy us, which is really like gripping onto water. And for Juggernaut, that's his armor. And it's ironic because he tells the armor, the sacrifices that I make for you so that we can be together. He was destroying himself and even the armor, just trying to hold on to as much of it as he can, only for him to finally realize that the armor is what needed to be sacrificed. So surrender is the acceptance of a situation, and sacrifice is the shedding of any person, possession, habit, addiction, way of thinking, and anything that ties you or holds you back with that past energy. And just because time has passed, it doesn't mean that you actively went through this process. Which means if we're internally or energetically stuck on these past energies, then even the new energies that come in are a reflection of the old energies, if that makes sense. So Juggernaut reminds me of a molting crab who has to let go and shed its old shell in order to grow. And even though that crab has to be vulnerable for a few days while the new shell hardens again, it's worth the expansion. But it all starts with the crab first breaking out of its old shell consciously and actively. And this is easily reflective of relationships that are dead weight, but we keep dragging it along anyways. But there's also a lot of other things that we hold on to and carry with us aside from people and possessions. Letting go of people who don't align with you and clearing out your physical space is one thing and just as relevant, but we also carry weight in our mental realm and in our heart space. For example, our dreams. And of course, our dreams are our fuel and fire a lot of times. But sometimes we get too hyper-focused on a specific formation of that dream. And it's not that we have to let go of the vision, dream, or goal, never that. It's kind of like that phrase that rejection is God's protection. We get rejected as a form of warning of what would ultimately either bring us back or keep us from what would best align us with what it is that we're actually seeking. So when we get rejected from opportunities or it feels like it passed us by, we have to have faith that there are better ones ahead. And that's a major limbo, right? When we switch careers, you have to have faith in what you're doing and surrender to the fact that you may not have any visible supporters around you giving you the go ahead or telling you to keep going when there's no sign of if you'll be successful. You then have to continuously sacrifice that time and energy towards this new path while you're in limbo, which is why pursuing passions and finding our purpose is so difficult because it's often related to our careers and there's already so much stress and pressure around that. And that applies to relationships just the same. When we heal our own toxic patterns and cycles, we tend to fall out with all types of people because we're no longer in alignment. And there's a limbo in that when it feels like, there aren't any people who actually understand us. So another example of unnecessary weight is carrying pain. As a result of pain and trauma, we can carry an addiction to what soothes that pain. And this isn't always just about alcohol, drugs, and weed. Codependency and love is a type of addiction. Social media is an addiction and the easiest distraction, and even overworking. And ultimately, just anything that we are giving our time to what feels like is supporting us, but in reality is slowly deteriorating us and keeping us further from happiness and peace. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing too, right? So our traumas can turn into our very own armor. But in that, just as much as we block the negative energy, it also starts blocking the positive. In plain terms, be careful of not carrying the negative emotions of the past into the present and future, which doesn't mean ignore the anger or sadness and focus on the opposite emotion, but actually surrendering to that emotion and allowing it to be and flow, which is of course easier said than done. But it's through that acceptance that we then learn to sacrifice what we're being asked to let go of, to fully digest and process the past so that we can be transformed by what has transpired. And if you actually sit with a negative emotion, it's always going to lead back to hurt. At some point, we have no choice but to surrender to the universe and to love, and both of those things are you. And that's the empowering part of surrender, is that you are both surrendering to a higher plan and in a sense to your own self. And we recognize the value and the power we carry within instead of without. Juggernaut even says, with all that power, I know how it feels to feel powerless. The reason why he felt so powerless is because he placed all his value on that armor instead of himself. He's like, the armor is all I've ever had that's mattered, which sounds kind of sad, but it's also kind of common. And people in general have the tendency to place the most valuable thing in their life as something external: our accomplishments, our possessions, our relationships, our lifestyle. And that's the empowerment of the universe stripping everything away to show you what your true value is. When it feels like you have no choice but to surrender your own will to the will of the universe, to trust divine timing to always take you where you're meant to be. Our strength isn't shown in what we possess or what we can possess, and that's the very humbling and simultaneously empowering experience of surrender. We get humbled by getting our most valued things snatched away from us, but if we allow that flow, we're then empowered by recognizing there's nothing more valuable or more powerful than me. And like I've said in previous videos about integration, awareness is one step and integrating that is another. And I'm really proud of Juggernaut because he is doing his best to integrate for sure. And isn't it ironic that in the surrender, he actually learned more control? He was just all destruction, another building falls, another building falls, another building falls. But now he's trying to help these kids. He's trying to use his mind a little bit more instead of recklessly crashing through things. And that may have been his form of control because that is his thing. It's all that mattered to him. So sacrificing something that represents all of that made him realize the important thing to control is himself, because he is the most prized possession. You are the most prized. And I also love that it's this tree that's telling him that he has to sacrifice what has come before him to show him the path forward. Very tree of life vibes, which represents the afterlife and the connection between earth and heaven, which I spoke a little bit about in the giant-sized X-Men. But the representation of the tree of life reflects this limbo experience, right? Because the limbo represents the death of consciousness for the elevation of a new one. And here he is with a different perspective and definitely a different approach. All right, so that's everything on Juggernaut. I will be posting a part 2 on the resistance of surrender, looking at the inverted aspect that they address in the X-Men series, which is why I'm going to separate them so it doesn't get too long. So stay tuned in for that. Thank you so much, Butterflies, for spending your time with me today. Stay flying free, and I'll see you next time. Bye.